And then the next one, the third P of 5 Ps, is past sexually transmitted infections. And that might be important because remember, some of them we can get rid of. How we're doing the chlamydia and gonorrhea testing next week, we can get rid of those. We can give you medicine and it goes away, it leaves your body. You can get it again if you're exposed to it again, but it doesn't live in you all the time. Some sexually transmitted infections, once they're in you, they stay in you. So it might be important for you to find out if they say they had a history of sexually transmitted infections, you might want to say, well, yeah, which one? And are you okay? And did you get treated for it? Maybe even if they had chlamydia, maybe they never took the medicine. So very important that way. And so there's some that are bacteria and some that are viruses. The bacteria ones we can get rid of. The viruses we can't. So I know we don't have time to go over all of them, but I like to tell people in my class, when we do go over all of them, I always say the ones with the H, or that begin with an H, are viruses. And then all the rest are bacteria. What are the H's? Help me. Herpes, HIV, hepatitis, and one more. HPV, human papillomavirus, the precursor to genital warts. All the H's are viruses. We can't get rid of those. So if you're ever on Jeopardy, double Jeopardy, bet it all, you would win, right? So the H's are viruses. We can't get rid of those. The others are bacteria. We can give you medicine. Okay? Not to say that someone with the viruses you can't have a relationship with. You need good communication and to take proper precautions. Okay? There's lots of people that have very healthy relationships and they have viral sexually transmitted infections. They can take medicine to keep the viral load down that they don't have as many outbreaks. Or they can get treated, and I know it sounds weird, we say they don't go away, but HPV is very tricky, and sometimes in a female it can clear up. It still lives in their body, but it can clear itself. But that's a whole different topic in and of itself. We won't get deep into that. So that's why, what do you think about, now I'm talking more from a healthcare perspective, what do you think about from the pop culture perspective?
I think STIs are one of those that it's pretty much the same across the board. Again, when I asked one of those questions to a lot of the participants, it was that same thing. People don't tell you things that you do not ask them directly. And while it's unfortunate, you know, because, well, this person is willing to have sex with me, but they're not willing to talk to me, across the board, anything that people did not know in their relationships, when I said, well, why didn't you share this, or why didn't, you know, your last partner know this? Because they didn't ask. And so across the board, that was their response. Now, we might say that, you know, that's not fair, and, you know, if this person wants to be with me, they should be open to communicate, but we also have to take personal responsibility and ask questions, and ask consistent questions. You can say, let's go get tested together. You know, there are, even if you know that you have been tested recently, there's nothing wrong with going to get tested again. And where you all have, you know, your current results together before you make whatever decision it is that, you know, as your parent, how you're going to move forward with your sexual relationship. So I don't think that you know, that there's a massively different approach to that. Particularly because, as you said, there are some that you can get rid of, there are some that you can't. But in the same sense, are there, and again, this would be much more from the health practitioner, are there certain repercussions that even with the ones that you can get rid of, if you don't treat them,
yeah.
are there certain
Oh,
things
that's
that
it. Yeah. So the ones that you can get rid of, let's just talk about chlamydia, because that's the most common bacterial sexually transmitted infection. Okay, let's say you have chlamydia and you choose not to get treated for it. Yes, there are health consequences that can happen, especially for the female. It can lead to scarring of your fallopian tube. Do you know where your fallopian? You have 2 fallopian tubes. So you have your uterus, then you have 2 fallopian tubes. They look like, oh, I don't know, fingers with antennas. And then you have your ovaries. Why are the fallopian tubes so important? What happens there? What big thing happens there? Go ahead.
They release the egg.
Well, the ovary releases the egg, it travels through the fallopian tube, and then what can happen there? That's where fertilization takes place, in the fallopian tube. Sperm have to swim all the way up, find that egg in the fallopian tube, it fertilizes, and then it travels back down to plant itself in the uterus. So if you have chlamydia that's untreated, cause a lot of scarring, especially scarring of the fallopian tube. So what happens? You can be infertile. It can't get through. There's too much scarring. It causes what's called pelvic inflammatory disease. A lot of these untreated bacterial sexually transmitted infections. So it's very, very important to get them treated. Very important for the male and the female. But it can really lead to fertility problems for the female later on. And it's very easy to treat. Chlamydia, we give you, it's azithromycin, 1 gram. Did you ever hear of Z-Pak, that antibiotic? We just give you 2 500 milligram tablets, and that clears it. And I'll usually say, don't have sex for a week. You don't have sex with your partner until they were tested and treated. Or you're just going to get it back again. And then they have to tell anyone that they were with. And I know that's very difficult to tell someone that, you have a sexually transmitted infection, but I try to say, well, put the shoe on the other foot. You would want them to tell you so that it didn't lead to problems later on in life. And I think it just goes along with maturity and being able to have this discussion, which sometimes is painful and, might make you feel embarrassed, but we said in the very beginning, so powerful. The most powerful thing you can do is have effective communication. Very powerful tool. So back to the second, go ahead.
I was just going to say, in terms of what Keisha said about the abstract communication versus more direct.
Yeah.
The last time I heard, HIV can take about 6 months to show up in your system. So if you ask your partner, were you tested for HIV after your last partner, and they say, yeah, I broke up 4 months ago and I got tested 2 months ago, that's really not good enough, because the virus can lay in your system about 6 months before it even shows up on a test. So specific questions with regard to HIV. I don't know about the other STDs, but I know with HIV you have to be really careful about timing of testing.
I think Dr. Ramsey has a great point about being specific. Well, when were you tested? And what happened after that? And that leads to, before we do the final 2 Ps, look at the back of your paper. There are places where you can get tested. So, the Berks AIDS Network, they do free HIV testing. Okay? You're also anonymous. You're a number, not a name. Okay? Health Services, we do HIV testing. You're anonymous. We have your name, but we can't share it with anyone. I can't share it with your professor. I can't share it with your parents. I can't share it with your roommate. That is against the law in Pennsylvania. Okay? We do a blood test. So the thing is, we draw your blood and we send it to a lab. So whenever we get blood work from you and send it to a lab, we need a copy of your insurance, because that goes through your insurance. Now, while everything is confidential on our end, your parents will get an insurance billing statement, and it's going to list all the things you had done. If you had a throat culture, if you had a mono test, if you had an HIV test. It doesn't say the results, but it's going to say what you had done. So I always like to tell students that, and you don't have to utilize our what we do in health services. You can come in and say, I want an HIV test, Alice, but I don't want one from health services. I'm fine with that. I'll refer you to Berks AIDS Network if you prefer to not use your insurance and be anonymous, okay? That's your choice. And my main concern is that you're all right, okay? So those 2, then there's Planned Parenthood. And then there's the Reading Hospital 1 year ago opened up a Center for Public Health, and they do STI screening also. So you have 4 options there. And if you don't like any of those, you come and see me and I'll have to find a 5th. But they're the 4 that we use. Okay? So that goes along with the STI screening. Okay, so let's do the last 2 Ps. Oh, pregnancy plans. So that might be another thing you want to discuss. Are you planning on getting pregnant, or are we planning on not getting pregnant? And what can we do to, go along with this planning in the best way? What do you think about that?
I think that is a conversation that people avoid, and that they shouldn't avoid, that they most certainly need to discuss. And it also goes back to something else that you had mentioned before about who is responsible for what. So if you're saying no, that the goal is not to, to get pregnant anytime soon, or to not to have children, whose responsibility is, birth control? Whose responsibility is this if you do happen to get pregnant and decide that this isn't what you all want? Who is responsible for these things? And that you have conversations about this in advance, rather than once you know, everything has occurred and emotions are high and tension is high and frustration and people have, you know, sort of stopped speaking and shut down communication. I can't, I don't even think I can count how many people have come and talked to me about things after the fact of saying, well, you know, this person didn't tell me this, or I heard this, you know, and all sorts of elements are coming out after the fact. Well, maybe my partner was messing with this person or this person, and where they then don't want to take ownership of this situation. Everyone's trying to run, everyone's trying to get away from it, rather than had it been something that was discussed in advance of what will we do if we find ourselves in this situation. Still doesn't mean that, you know, it's going to be perfect, but if you have a plan in place, it's at least, you know, at least you have a solid beginning.
What kind of protection are we going to use? And what are you trying to protect?
Yeah.
Are you trying to protect against pregnancy? Are you trying to protect against sexually transmitted infections? Are you trying to protect against both? So you need to discuss that as well. You might have two people that they're in a long-term monogamous relationship and they were tested for sexually transmitted infections and they had built trust and they don't feel that they need to protect themselves from infections at this time. So they might not choose a barrier method such as condoms because they don't feel that they have a risk of exposure. But maybe they want to protect themselves from pregnancy, so they might decide to use a hormonal method like the pill or the patch or the ring or the implantable. There's all different types, 5 different types out there. So they might want to do that. So that's something you need to discuss too, protection and what do you want to protect yourself from?
I think one of the main things that goes back to everything we're talking about, obviously the value of communication, the power of communication, but also taking ownership for your own decisions. That, you know, you have a right to make the decisions that you make. You have a right to either engage in the activities that you desire to, or to say, no, I'm not going to participate in this, and to feel completely comfortable and confident in those decisions and in that conversation. And to know that if your partner isn't willing to have these conversations, no matter how embarrassing, no matter how challenging, another conversation probably needs to happen. Because, you know, if you care about that person cares about you, but you aren't able to have a very relevant and very real conversation, you know, there's probably some other things you should be concerned about.
What do you think about some final thoughts? Or did you hear of a situation that you would want to discuss? Like, oh, somebody said this, how do you think you should approach that?